A warship, the USS Maine, was sent to Spanish Cuba to protect American interests in the region. While it was docking in Havana, the capital of Spanish Cuba, the USS Maine exploded. Spain was blamed for the explosion, which later turned out to be false. Anyways, 2 months after that, the USA and Spain went to war. Remember the Maine? To hell with Spain. This was the slogan for the duration of the war. The USA had the upper hand when it came to naval combat. In the Philippines, the main Spanish fleet stationed there was destroyed. In a pretty interesting incident, the Spanish island of Guam was taken without any fighting, since the soldiers there didn't know that they were at war. In June, the Americans made a successful landing in Cuba, mainly the region around Guantanamo Bay. The Spanish army was very good at defending and retreating, so a lot of casualties were suffered by the Americans. A month after that, yet another naval battle destroyed the Spanish fleet. Most importantly, Puerto Rico was invaded by the Americans, but the Spanish forces prevented a landing. During that time, however, Santiago, the second largest city in Cuba at the time, was captured. Not so long after that, the Spanish sued for peace. In the Peace Treaty of Paris, the USA would get Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Funnily enough, the Americans would also pay Spain, not the other way around. Here is the peace treaty visualized, with all the land the USA was able to get. Cuba was a protectorate of the United States, and in the month of May 1902, they got their independence. But what if that changed? What if Spain was able to win the Spanish-American War? This was somewhat possible to occur, and it would have massive changes for the world and both countries involved. Keep watching so you can see how this little war could have changed the outcome of the First World War. Also, the Panama Canal might have never been built in this timeline. Before the war with the USA, Spain was a crumbling empire. They owned Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, the Philippines, Western Sahara, North Morocco, and Equatorial Guinea. This might sound like a lot, but just 200 years ago, the Spanish Empire used to look like this, including modern-day Mexico and most of South America. After Spain lost their war against the Americans, the Spanish Empire was dead. In 1902, Spain made this official, as they sold these islands to Germany. I want to show you this silver coin from 1725. It was from about the time when Spain was at their territorial peak. Here is another silver coin from 1918 from the Philippines, when the USA controlled them. Let me know in the comments if you want to see me show off more coins. Also, like the video for more uploads. Fun fact I want to mention is that the countries of Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Peru didn't want to leave the Spanish Empire. Peru was pressured by Simón Bolívar, and the rest of the colonies were taken by the USA. Now, let's explore what could have gone differently for Spain, so they can save their crumbling empire, and how they could win against the USA. In Cuba there were over 200,000 Spanish soldiers stationed there before the war, which is a very large amount of soldiers defending the country. In our timeline, most of them got sent back to Spain, but if all of them had stayed, it would be nearly impossible for the Americans to make a landing in Cuba. The Philippines was always rebelling against Spanish rule, and it was costing the Spanish a lot of money to keep the colony intact. One reason why the Filipinos wanted independence from Spain is that they were the only territory that didn't have their own viceroyalty. Instead, they were ruled by Spanish Mexico at the time. There are a lot of mixed opinions on the matter, but I think it's safe to say that if the Spanish give the Philippines more autonomy, they would be in a stronger position for the war. Finally, the Spanish Navy couldn't beat the American Navy, so nothing could have changed in that department. When the war started, there was little action in the Caribbean. In the Pacific theater, however, things were a lot different. The Spanish Navy would still get destroyed, but the Americans would struggle to make a landing. When they eventually make one, they would be met by resistance and disease. The Americans captured the south of the country, with the major city of Davao. The exiled Filipino revolutionary Emilio Aguinaldo was brought to secure the domestic support, which had some initial success. Despite the success in the Pacific theater, the American public was starting to get wary, and some people started to oppose the war. Thousands of American lives were lost in Cuba, with nothing to show for it. The next month, the Americans captured one of the main Filipino islands, the Samar Island. Just a year prior, however, the island was hit by a massive earthquake, with a magnitude of 8.1. For comparison, the earthquake that hit Fukushima, Japan in 2011 was with a magnitude of 7.4. When the Americans landed in the Samar Island, they found it hard to supply themselves and everything was destroyed there, so they had to keep a small army, with disease killing even more people. Spain founded the first Philippine Republic, which declared war on the USA. In our timeline, just after the Americans secured the Philippines, the first Philippine Republic declared independence from them, and there was yet another war between the Americans and the Philippines, which lasted for 3 years, finishing in 1902. With that in mind, it became increasingly difficult for the Americans to keep fighting in the Philippines. Back in Cuba, the remainder of the Spanish Navy was destroyed. The Americans were confident that a blockade will start the Spanish soldiers stationed in Cuba and they will surrender. This might have actually worked if it wasn't for the growing pressure back home to end the war. So, the Americans had to make a forced landing, which went terribly and over 5,000 soldiers died on both sides. William McKinley, the American president at the time, was overthrown and his prime minister, Garrett A. Hobart, was forced to sign a peace treaty with the Spanish. The peace treaty will be signed in Havana, the place where the USS Maine was blown up and the war initially started. Spain wouldn't lose any land to the USA, but the Philippines will be granted independence. The Americans would have to pay close to $100 million for the damaged infrastructure and for Spain to build a new navy. This would put a lot of pressure on the US economy. Most importantly, US politics would take a drastic turn. They will become isolated and have a neutral foreign policy. The USA wouldn't have an expansionist foreign policy, which is very important for world history. This means that when the First World War begins, it is very unlikely that the USA will join, which could change the outcome of the war. Spain would have to use force to keep the remainder of the empire together. Since they let go of the Philippines, the colonies of Cuba and Puerto Rico would want the same. In 1906, Spain would reform and use the reparations that were paid by the USA to invest in their colonies, giving them a viceroyalty status and securing their support. The relationship between Spain and their viceroyalties would be similar to the UK and their dominions. Most importantly, the Philippines would join the alliance, but would still be very separate from Spain and their politics. One thing that I think will change the world is that the Panama Canal wouldn't get built, or at least not by the Americans. But before I tell you why, I would strongly appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video so far. So, about the Panama Canal. What happened in our timeline is that after the USA had defeated the Spanish in their war, the USA supported an uprising in Panama in the year of 1903. This happened because Panama was part of Colombia and the USA wanted to build a canal connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. Colombia didn't allow the USA to do that, so that's why the USA supported the uprising in Panama, under the condition that the new government allowed the Americans to build the canal. With the USA losing the Spanish-American War, it is unlikely that they will pursue that idea, meaning that Colombia gets to keep Panama, which is awesome for them. For the sake of this video, let's say that Spain and Colombia have a very good relations and they build the canal together, splitting the profits 50-50. With that, the Spanish alliance grows, and it's possible that Colombia joins the Spanish faction. What will change is when the canal opened. In our timeline, it opened in early 1914. In this alternative timeline, the canal would for sure open a couple of years later. However, due to the First World War, it might be delayed. Depends on if Spain gets involved in the war. It's certain that the USA won't join, so that will change the outcome drastically. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a follow-up video on this scenario and how the First World War could have played out. Are you curious what would happen if Portugal, instead of Spain, had saved its colonial empire? Watch this video if you want to find out. Leave a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.